You cannot have people who love what you do without also having people who hate what you do. The only escape from that is mediocrity. If you are so boring and so uninteresting that no one gives a damn whether you exist or not, yeah, you don't get the haters, but you also don't get the impact of people who really enjoy your work. And I think Amazon is that just at the massive scale, right? They've brought so much value and change to technology, to commerce, that they must simply have a black hole size of haters. Otherwise, the universe is simply going to tip over.
Let me ask you about small teams. So you mentioned Jason a bunch of times, Jason Fried. You have been partners for a long, long time. Perhaps it's fair to say he's more on the sort of the design business side, and you're like the tech, the engineering wizard. How have you guys, over all these years, creating so many amazing products, not murder each other? It's a great story of like partnership. What can you say about collaboration? What can you say about Jason that you love, that you've learned from? Why does this work?
So first I'll say we have tried to murder each other several times over the years, but far less, I think, in the last decade. In the early days, our product discussions were so fierce that when we were having them in the office and there were other employees around, some of them were legitimately worried that the company was about to fall apart because the volume coming out of the room would be so high and sound so acrimonious that they were legitimately worried the whole thing was going to fall apart. But you know what's funny is that it never felt like that in the moment. It always felt like just a peak, vigorous search for something better. And that we were able to stomach that level of adversity on the merits of an idea because it was about the idea. It wasn't about the person. And it never really got personal. Not even never really. It didn't get personal. It wasn't like, Jason, you're an asshole. It was like, Jason, you're an idiot. And you're an idiot because you're looking at this problem the wrong way. And let me tell you the right way to do it.
As a small tangent, let me say that some people have said, and we'll probably return to this, that you're sometimes can have flights of temper on the internet and so on. I never take it that way because it is the same kind of ilk. Maybe I haven't seen the right kind of traces of temper, but usually it's about the idea, and it's just excited, passionate human.
That's exactly what I like to think of it as. It doesn't always come across as that. Okay. And I can see why spectators in particular sometimes would see something that looks like I'm going after the man rather than the ball. And I do think I've tried to get better at that. But in my relationship with Jason, I think it's worked so well because we have our own distinct areas of competence where we fully trust each other. Jason trusts me to make the correct technical decisions. I trust him to make the correct design and product direction decisions. And then we can overlap and share on the business, on marketing, on writing, on other aspects of it. So that's one thing, is that if you're starting a business with someone where you do exactly the same as they do, and you're constantly contesting who's the more competent person, I think that's far more difficult and far more volatile. So if you're starting a business and you're both programmers and you both work on the same kind of programming, good luck. I think that's hard. I tried to pick an easier path working with a designer where I knew that at least half of the time I could just delegate to his experience and competence and say, like, you know what? I may have an opinion. I have an opinion all the time on design. But I don't have to win the argument because I trust you. Now, occasionally we would have overlaps on business or direction where we'd both feel like we had a strong stake in the game and we both had a claim to competence in that area. But then, for whatever reason, we also both had a long-term vision where I would go, do you know what? I think we're wrong here. But as I learned from Jeff Bezos, by the way, I'm going to disagree and commit. That was one of those early lessons he gave us that was absolutely crucial and perhaps even instrumental in ensuring that Jason and I have been working together for a quarter of a century. Disagree and commit is one of the all-time Jeff Bezos greats.
I'm just surprised that Yoko Ono hasn't come along. You know what I mean? Like there's so many Yokos in this world.
It might have happened, if not in part because we don't sit on each other's lap all the time. Most of our careers, we haven't even lived in the same city. Like, I lived in Chicago for a couple of years while we were getting going after I'd moved to the US in 2005. But then I moved to Malibu, and then I lived in Spain, and then I lived in Copenhagen. And Jason and I, from the foundation of our relationship, learned how to work together in a remarkably efficient way where we didn't have to actually talk that much. On any given week, I'd be surprised if Jason and I spent more than 2 hours of direct exchange and communication.
Yeah, sometimes it's the basic human frictions that
Yes,
just
I think if
accumulate
you
over
rub
time.
up against another person, that person damn well better be your spouse if it's too much for too long.
Yeah, but even there,
Even there,
COVID has really tested the relationship. It's fascinating to watch.
it has. And I do think that having some separation, which is kind of counterintuitive, because I think a lot of people think the more collaboration you can have, the better. The more ideas that can bounce back and forth, the better. And both Jason and I, for whatever reason, came to the conclusion early on in careers, absolutely not. That's complete baloney. This is why we were huge proponents of remote work. This is why I enjoy working in my home office where I can close the door and not see another human for like 6 hours at the time. I don't want to bounce ideas off you all the time. I want to bounce ideas off you occasionally, and then I want to go off and implement those ideas. There's way too much bouncing going on and not enough scoring, not enough dunking. And I think this is one of the great traps of executive rule. Once a founder elevates themselves all the way up to an executive, where what they're doing is just telling other people what to do, that's the realm they live in 24/7. They just live in the idea realm. Oh, I can just tell more people more things what to do, and we can just see it happen. If you actually have to be part of implementing that, you slow your horse. You think like, you know what? I had a good idea last week. I'm going to save the rest of my good ideas until next month.
And there is a temptation for the managers and for the people in the executive layer to do something, which that something usually means a meeting,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so that's why you say
Their job is telling other people what to do.
yeah. And the meeting. So this is one of the big things you're against is
Meetings are toxic.
Yeah.
And this really, I think, ties into this with Jason and I. If I had to count out the total number of meetings we've had in 24 years of collaborations where we in person sat in front of each other and discussed a topic, it'd be less than whatever 3 months at a fan company. We just haven't done that much. We haven't worn it out. One of these funny metaphors that Trump came up with at one point was a human has like a limited number of steps in their life, right? Like that's the longevity argument here. You can do so much activity and then you run out. There's some kernel in that idea that can be applied to relationship. There's some amount of exchange we can have. There's some amount of time we can spend together where you can wear it out. Jason and I were diligent about not wearing each other out. And I think that is absolutely key to the longevity of the relationship, combined with that level of trust, and then just combining with the level that we really like the work itself. We don't just like the brainstorming, the says where we just come up with good ideas. No, we like to do the ideas. And we like to be part of that process directly ourselves. I like to program. He likes to do design. We could go off and do our little things for long stretches of time. Occasionally come together and go like, hey, let's launch a great product.
This might sound like I'm asking you to do therapy, but I find myself to sometimes want or long for a meeting because I'm lonely. Like, because remote work, just sitting by yourself, I don't know, it can get really lonely for long stretches of time.
Let me give you a tip.
Uh-huh.
Get a wife.
Yes. God damn it.
Get a couple of kids.
All right.
Like, family really is the great antidote to loneliness. And I mean that as sincerely as I can possibly say it. I certainly had exactly that feeling you described early in my career when I was working remotely. And I was just like me living in an apartment, a total stereotype where for the longest time when I first moved to Chicago, all I had on the floor was a mattress. And then I bought this big TV and I didn't even mount it. And then I had a stack of DVDs. And I was working a lot of time. And then I would just go home and I'd do that. And it wasn't great. It really wasn't. Like, I do think that humans need humans. Yeah. And if you can't get them at work, and I actually sort of kind of don't want them at work. At least I don't want them for 40 hours a week. That's not what I prefer. You need something else. You need other relationships in your life. And there's no greater depth of relationship if you can find someone that you actually just want to spend a lot of time with. That's key to it. And I think it's key for both Jason and I that we've had families for quite a long time. And it grounds you too in a way where the sprint of a startup can get traded in for the marathon of an enduring company. And you get settled in a way. We talked briefly about sometimes I get fired up. I mean, a lot of times, maybe even most of the times I get fired up about topics. But I don't get fired up in the same way now as I used to when I was 24. I'm still extremely passionate about ideas and trying to find the right things. But having a family, meeting my wife, building a life around that has just mellowed everything out in a completely cliche way. But I think it's actually key. I think if we could get more, even younger people, not to wait until they were in their late goddamn 30s or early 40s to hitch up with someone, we'd be better off and we'd have more stable business relationships as well, because folks would get that nurturing human relation somewhere else. Now, when I say all of that, I also accept that there are plenty of great businesses that's been built over the years that have not been built remote, that have been built by a gang of hooligans sitting in an office for immense hours of time. I mean, both John Carmack and Tim Sweeney talked about that in the 90s with their careers, that was just basically work, sleep, hang out with the guys at the office, right? Totally fair. That never appealed to me. Both Jason and I saw eye to eye on the idea that 40 hours a week dedicated to work was enough. That if we were going to go to distance for not just the 5 to 7 years it takes to build a VC case up to an exit, but for potentially 10 years, 20 years or further, we needed to become whole humans, because only that whole humanness was going to go to distance, which included building up friendships outside of work, having hobbies, finding a mate, and having a family. And that entire existence, those legs of the stool, that work is not the only thing in life, is completely related to the fact that we've been around for 25 years. There's way too much, especially in America, of false trade-offs. Oh, you want to build a successful business? Well, you can either have money, enjoyment, family, or health. Pick one. Mm-hmm. What? Why do we have to give up all of this? Now, again, I'm not saying there are moments, periods in life where you can sprint, but I am saying if that sprint turns into a decade, you're going to pay for it. And you're going to pay for it in ways I've seen time and again seemed like a very bad trade. That even if it works, and by the way, most of the time it does not. Most of the time startups go bust. Most of the time people spend 5-7 years or something that does not pan out, and they don't get the payout. And then they just sit with regret of like, what the fuck happened to my 20s? Mm-hmm. Early on, Jason and I basically made the pact that working together was not going to lead to that kind of regret. That we were going to allow ourselves and each other to build a whole life outside of work. And the fact that that worked is something I feel is almost like forbidden knowledge. Certainly in technology circles in the US, it's something that we've tried to champion for 20 years and we still get slacked for. Just 2 days ago, I had another Twitter beef with someone saying like, oh, well, okay, maybe it worked, but you didn't turn into Atlassian, so you're a failure. Basecamp isn't Jira, so why are you even bothering? And it's such a fascinating winner-takes-all mentality that unless you dominate everyone else in all the ways, you've lost. Mm-hmm. When so much of life is far more open to multiple winners, where we can end up with a business that have made hundreds of millions of dollars over the years, and we've kept much of that to do whatever we want. And that's enough. That's good. That's great. That's actually something worth aspiring to. Certainly, it should be a path for someone to consider choosing rather than the VC unicorn and bust mentality that dominates everything.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you about this exchange so you can explain to me the whole saga. But so just to link on that a little bit is I think there's a notion that success for a tech founder is like work for a few years, all out, and then exit, sort of sell your company for, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars. That's success. When it seems in reality, when you look at who the people like you, like really smart, creative humans, who they actually are and what happiness entails, it actually entails working your whole life a little bit. Just like, because you actually love the programming, you love the building, you love the designer, and you don't want to exit. And that's something you've talked about really eloquently about. So like you actually want to create a life where you're always doing the building and doing it in a way that's not completely taking over your life.
Mojito Island is a mirage. It always was. There is no retirement for ambitious people. There is no just sitting back on the beach and sipping a mojito for what? For 2 weeks before you go damn crazy and want to get back into the action? That's exactly what happens to most people who have the capacity to build those kinds of exits. I've never seen, I shouldn't say never, I've almost never seen anyone be able to pull that off. Yet so many think that that's why they're doing it. That's why they're sacrificing everything. Because once I get to the finish line, I'm golden. I've won. I can retire. I can sit back. I can just relax. And you find out that that kind of relaxation is actually hell.
Yeah.
It's hell for creative people to squander their God-given creative juices and capacities. And I was really lucky to read the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi early on.
Nice. The pronunciations.
Do you know what? I had to practice that with AI over the last few days because I knew I was going to cite him, and I butchered his name several times. So AI taught me how to pronounce that, at least somewhat correctly. But his main work over his career was essentially the concept of flow that came out of a search for understanding happiness. Why are some people happy? When are they happy? And what he learned was quite illuminating. He learned that people aren't happy when they sit on Mojito Island. They're not happy when they're free of all obligations and responsibilities. No, they're happy in these moments where they're reaching and stretching their capacities just beyond what they can currently do. In those moments of flow, they can forget time and space. They can sit in front of the keyboard, program a hard problem, think 20 minutes have passed, and suddenly it's been 3 hours. They look back upon those moments with the greatest amount of joy, and that is what peak happiness is. If you take away the pursuit of those kinds of problems, if you eliminate all the problems from your plate, you're going to get depressed. You are not going to have a good time. Now, there are people who can do that, but they're not the same kind of people who built these kinds of companies. So you have to accept the kind of individual you are. If you are on this path, don't bullshit yourself. Don't bullshit yourself into thinking, I'm just going to sacrifice everything, my health, my family, my hobbies, my friends. But in 10 years, I'm going to make it all up. Because in 10 years, I can do it. It never works out like that. It doesn't work out on both ends of it. It does not work out if you're successful and you sell your company because you'll get bored out of your mind after 2 weeks on retirement. It doesn't work out if the company is a failure and you regret the last 10 years spent for nothing. It doesn't work out if it all works and you stay in the business because it never gets any easier. So you're going to fail on all metrics if you just go, there's only work and nothing else. And I didn't want that. I wanted the happiness of flow. I understood that insight was true, but I wanted to do it in a way where I could sustain the journey for 40 or 50 years.
And there's other interesting caveat that I've heard you say is that if you do exit, you sell your company and you want to stay in, you want to do another company, that's going to usually not be as fulfilling.
Yes.
Because really your first baby, like...
You can't do it again. Or most people can't do it again. Because their second idea is not going to be as good as the first one. It is so rare to capture lightning in the bottle like we have, for example, with Basecamp. I know this from experience because I've been trying to build a lot of other businesses since, and some of them have been moderate successes, even good successes. None of them have been Basecamp. It's really difficult to do that twice. But founders are arrogant pricks, including myself. And we like to think that, do you know what? We succeeded in large part because we're just awesome. We're just so much better than everyone else. And in some ways, that's true some of the time. But you can also be really good at something that matters for a hot moment. That door is open. The door closes. Now, you're still good at the thing, but it doesn't matter. No one cares. There's that part of it. And then there's a part of it that going back to experience things for the first time only happens the first time. You can't do it again. I don't know if I have it in me to go through the bullshit of the early days again. And I say bullshit in the sense of the most endearing sense. It's all great to do it. I know too much. This is one of the reasons why whenever I'm asked the questions, if you could tell your younger self something that would really, what would you say to your younger self? I would fucking not say a thing. I would not rob my younger self of all the life experiences that I've been blessed with due to the ignorance of how the world works. Building up the wisdom about how the world works is a joy. And you got to build it one brick at a time. If you just handed all the results, it's like, oh, should we watch a movie? Here's how it ends. I don't want to watch the movie now. You spoiled it. I don't want you to spoil my business experience. I don't want to spoil any of my ignorance. The greatest blessing half the time when you're starting something new is A, you don't know how hard it's going to be. B, you don't know what you don't know. Like the adventure is the payoff. The responsibility is the payoff. This is something Jordan Peterson has really taught me to articulate. This notion that responsibility is actually key to meaning. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl talks about this as well. That we can endure any hardship if there's a reason why. Now, he talked about it in truly life-altering concentration camp ways, but you can also apply it at a smaller scale with less criticality of even just your daily life, that all that hardship in building the original business, that is responsibility you take upon yourself. The appeal, the reason you take that on you is in part because you don't know fully what it entails. If I'd known up front how hard it would be, how much frustration there'd be along the way. If you just told me that in a narrative before I got started, I would have been like, maybe I should just go get a job.
I mean, you said so many smart things there. Just to pick one, it's funny that sometimes the advice givers, the wisdom givers, have gone through all the bullshit, and so there is a degree to which you want to make the mistake. So I think I would still give the advice of you want to have a stretch of your life where you work too hard, including anything that fails. I don't think you can learn the lessons why that's a bad idea in any other way except by doing it. There is a degree, but of course you don't.
I think you should stretch. Should you have to stretch for a decade? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, the decade thing is 20s is a special time.
It's a lot to trade. You don't get your 20s back. Yeah. You don't get your 30s back. You don't get your 40s back. I would have regretted, personally, if I hadn't done the other things I did in my 20s, if I hadn't had the fun I had, if I hadn't had the friends I had, if I hadn't built up the hobbies that I did, if I hadn't started driving race cars at an early enough age to actually get really good at it, if I'd just gone all in on business, because I would have got the same out in the end. This is something Derek Sivers really taught me, is he has this great essay about how when he went for a bike ride, he could go really hard, all out, and he could do the ride, I think, in 19 minutes. Or he could enjoy the ride, go 5% slower, do the ride in 21 minutes, and realize there's only 2 minutes apart. Either I go all in all the time, there's nothing else, I'm completely exhausted at the end, or I travel the same distance and I arrive maybe 2 minutes later, but I got to enjoy the scenery, listen to the birds, smell the flowers. That journey is also valuable. Now, I say that while accepting and celebrating that if you want to be the best at one thing in the world, no, you have to sacrifice everything. You have to be obsessed with just that thing. There is no instant of someone who's the best in the world at something who's not completely obsessed. I didn't need to be best at anything. This was a blessing, a rare blessing of humility I had early on. It's like, you know what? I'm not that smart. I'm not that good. I'm not that talented. I can do interesting things by combining different aspects and elements that I know, but I'm not going to be the best at anything. And that released me from this singular obsession with just going, I'm going to be the best programmer in the world. No, I'm not. I fucking failed at it twice before I even got how conditionals work. I'm not smart enough to be the best at anything. I'm not dedicated enough to do that. That's a bit of a blessing. And I think as a society, we have to straddle both celebrating peak excellence, which we do all the time, and celebrating the peak intensity of mission it takes to become that. And then also going like, you know what? We don't all need to be Michael Jordan. There's only going to be one of those.
Well, we should say that there's certain pursuits where a singular obsession is required. Basketball is one of them. By the way, probably racing. If you want to be the best 100%. At F1 in the world.
If you want to be Senna, you got to be a maniac.
But I would argue that there's most disciplines like programming allows, if you want to be quote unquote the best, whatever that means, I think that's judged at the end of your life. And usually if you look at that path, it's going to be a nonlinear one. You're not going to look like the life of an Olympic athlete who's singular focus. There's going to be some acid there in the 20s, or there's going to be several detours. Which the true greats, there's going to be detours. And sometimes they're not going to be Steve Jobs acid type of situation. There'll be just different companies you worked for, different careers, or different sort of efforts you allocated your life to, but it's going to be nonlinear. It's not going to be a singular focus.
The way I think about this sometimes is I want a good bargain on learning. I can become in the top 5% of whatever I defined as good at something much, much easier. Perhaps it's 20 times easier, 100 times easier to get into the top 5% than it is to get into the top 0.1%. That's almost impossibly hard to get into that. But if I'm content just being in the top 5%, I could be in the top 5% on like 5 things at once. I can get really good at writing. I can get decent at driving a race car. I can become pretty good at programming. I can run a company. I can have a family. I can do a lot of things at the same time that gives me sort of that variety that almost was idealized. Karl Marx has this idea, I'm going to fish in the morning and hammer in the evening and paint on the weekends, right? That there's a sense, for me at least, where his diagnosis of alienation was true. That just that tunnel vision, there's just this one thing, I'm just going to focus on that, gives me a sense of alienation I can't stomach. When I'm really deep on programming, and sometimes I go deep for weeks, maybe even in a few cases, months, I have to come up for air and I have to go do something else. Like, all right, that was programming for this year. I've done my part. I'm going to go off writing or annoy people on the internet or drive some race cars or do something else. And then I can do the programming thing with full intensity again next year.
Speaking of annoying people on the internet, you got to explain to me this drama. Okay, so what is this guy that said, imagine losing to Jira, but boasting that you have a couple $1 million per year? So this had to do with this almost now a meme decision to leave the cloud. DHH left the cloud. I think that's literally a meme, but it's also a fascinating decision. Can you talk to the full saga of DHH leaves the cloud?
Yes.
Leaving AWS, saving money, and I guess the case this person is making now
is that we wasted our time optimizing a business that could have been 100 times bigger if we'd just gone for the moon.
And for the moon includes
venture capital,
but also
other things, includes not caring about cost.
But also because AGI's around the corner, you should have been investing into AI, right? Is this just part
sort of tangentially? I think it's a bit of a muddy argument, but if we just take it at its peak ideal, which I actually think is a reasonable point, is that you can get myopically focused on counting pennies when you should be focused on getting pounds, right?
Yeah.
That I've optimized our spend on infrastructure by getting out of the cloud, and that took some time, and I could have taken that time and spent it on making more features that would have attracted more customers or spend even more time with AI or done other things. Opportunity cost is real. I'm not denying that. I'm pushing back on the idea that for a company of our size, saving $2 million a year on our infrastructure bill, which is about somewhere between half to 2/3, goes directly to the bottom line, which means it's returned to Jason and I as owners and our employees, part of our profit sharing plan. It's totally worth doing. This idea that costs don't matter is a very Silicon Valley way of thinking that I, again, understand at the scale of something maybe, but I also actually think it's aesthetically unpleasing. I find an inefficient business, as I find an inefficient program full of line noise, to just be a splinter in my brain. I hate looking at an expense report and just seeing disproportionate waste. And when I was looking at our spend at 37 Signals a while back, a few years back, I saw bills that did not pass my smell test. I remembered how much we used to spend on infrastructure before the cloud, and I saw numbers I could not recognize in proportion to what we needed. The fact that computers have gotten so much faster over time, shouldn't things be getting cheaper? Why are we spending more and more money servicing more customers? Yes, but with much faster computers, Moore's law should be lowering the costs. And the opposite is happening. Why is that happening? And that started a journey of unwinding why the cloud isn't as great as a deal as people like to think that it is.
Yeah, can we look at the specifics just for people who don't know the story and then generalize to what it means about the role of the cloud in the tech business? So the specifics is you were using AWS S3?
We were using AWS for everything.
Okay.
Hey.com launched as an entirely cloud app. It was completely on AWS for compute, for databases, for all of it. We were using all the systems as they're best prescribed that we should. Our total cloud bill for Basecamp, our total spend with AWS was, I think, 3.2 million or 3.4 million at its peak. That's kind of a lot of money. 3.4 million. I mean, we have a ton of users and customers, but still, that just struck me as unreasonable. And the reason why it was so unreasonable was because I had the pitch for the cloud ringing in my ears. Hey, this is going to be faster. This is going to be easier. This is going to be cheaper. Why are you trying to produce your own power? Like, do you have your own power plant? Why would you do that? Leave the computers to the hyperscalers. They're much better at it anyway. I actually thought that was a compelling pitch. I bought in on that pitch for several years and thought, you know what? I'm done ever owning a server again. We're just going to rent our capacity, and Amazon is going to be able to offer us services much cheaper than we could buy them themselves because they're going to have these economies of scale. And I was thinking, Jeff's word ringing, my competitor's margin is my opportunity. That was something he used to drive Amazon.com with. That if he could just make 2% when the other guy was trying to make 4%, he would end up with all the money, and on volume, he would still win. So I thought that was the operating ethos for AWS. It turns out that's not true at all. AWS, by the way, operates at almost 40% margin. So just in that, there's a clue that competitors are not able to do the competitive thing we like about capitalism, which is to lower costs and so forth. So the cloud pitch, in my optics, is fundamentally false. It did not get easier, first of all. I don't know if you've used AWS recently. It is hella complicated. If you think Linux is hard, you've never tried to set up IAM rules or access parameters or whatever for AWS.
AWS was always difficult. It was always clunky.
Well, I think it's gotten even more difficult. But
Okay.
yes. Now, some of that is it's difficult because it's very capable and you have a bunch of capacity on tap. And there are reasons. I don't think they're good enough to justify how complicated the whole jingamajing has become. But what's certainly true is that it's no longer easier. It's not easier to use AWS than it is to run your own machines, which we learned when we pulled out of the cloud and didn't hire a single extra person. Even though we operate all our own hardware, the team stayed exactly the same. So you have this three-way pitch, right? It's going to be easier. It's going to be cheaper. It certainly wasn't cheaper. We've just proved that by cutting our spend on infrastructure by half to 2/3. And it's going to be faster. The last bit was true.